Are we going to be in a recession in the next 2 years?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
The development of that skill, who want to develop mastery, will do really well. Venture capital has never had to do that because it's been very small and cottage. However, we now see that technology is absolutely pervasive in society, that it will lead us out, right? If we're in a recession over the next 2 years, what will lead us out? It'll be this kind of growth.
Are we going to be in a recession in the next 2 years?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
So
it's on the record on that.
I mean, I hope it's not true, but I think the odds are very, very high that we are. But my point is, tech will become, and venture capital will look like, in the next 20 years, private equity and hedge funds and everything else. Systematic, systematized, right? Mechanistic.
Okay,
that's good.
It's interesting you say that. So for what it's worth, I reported recently that Chamath is out trying to raise money for social capital. He's not going to talk about that because there's probably someone from the SEC here, and he'll be let out in handcuffs if he does. But let me ask one of the. Unless you wanted, do you want to talk about it? You want to talk about fundraising?
I mean, I've been handcuffed before, but not by the SEC. No, I was just kidding. Go ahead.
BFD After Dark will be tonight, starting at 10 p.m. down the street. Let me ask. One of the things when you changed social capital, which you said had been a traditional firm in terms of raising outside capital, and you kind of moved into a family office. One of the things I heard at the time was one of the things you had been doing internally was making the firm call it a little bit more algorithmic and feeling that the human touch in terms of investment decisions maybe wasn't needed as much, and you could maybe automate some of that. A, was that correct that you were doing that, and B, were you right?
It was correct, and no, I was wrong. It didn't work. But it's a very good question, and again, it goes back to what does the venture industry need to do to really mature to meet the opportunity at hand? Like I said, we need to be more mechanistic and look like everybody else. And so in our organization, I have a North Star. Now, this may really not be appealing to certain people, but our North Star is what is our aggregate rate of compounding. That is it. Nothing else matters. And every time I feel that we're decaying, and there's a couple of sub-metrics underneath. Another metric, that we have a table, it's like the wall of shame, okay? If you walk into our office, you'll see a table. On the left-hand side, it's where we've made our biggest winners. $1 billion here, $500 million there, whatever. But on the right-hand side is our biggest losers. We have never lost more than $27.5 million in a deal.
What
ever.
Deal? What deal?
Well, there's been a couple.
I mean, it's on your wall of shame.
Yeah, I mean, Sprig, we lost 27 million. Premise, we lost 27 million. But there's a bunch of these. I'm happy to tell you. Yeah. But my point is, the ratio is 24-1. Why is that important? I think it's really important to make sure people understand walking in the door what the goal is. The goal is not to make friends with entrepreneurs. It's to have them respect you, not to like you. The goal is to return a ton of money back to your LPs. That is it, and that's measured in that one number. So I would experiment a lot with different ways to do that job. Big teams, small teams, generalists, sector-specific experts, always guided by that thing. So Dan, what you saw was a lot of my experimentation. And by the way, for those of you guys that understood what I did at Facebook, that's what I built. It was an experimentation machine. It was how do you build the machine to build the machine? And I think investing can be done the same way, and I set out to do that here as well.
I wasn't going to ask you this, but I'm curious. You just brought up Facebook. Your job at Facebook was in charge of growth, basically. If there was, and they've plateaued at least on the Big Blue app. If you were back at Facebook, what's the one thing you would do to get user growth going again?
Look, I just did the Lex Friedman podcast. It'll come out in the next couple of weeks, and he asked me this question: what would you do if you were CEO for a day? I'll give you the answer that I gave him, just to be consistent. I think that Facebook is probably the best company in a position to build the critical piece of AGI that is not yet available. So if you take AGI and you decompose it, this is just basically general intelligence. I think that you can summarize AGI as there's cognitive compute and then there's reasoning. That's how your left and right brains work together. You can do math and you can emote, right? You can feel, and you put the two together, you reason. If you think about what Facebook has, is they have the most prolific data set on all of that emotional reasoning. Every single reaction to every single possible stimulus is actually documented in every single Facebook post, WhatsApp message, and so the idea that you could take that and Instagram and pour it into a learning system. So if I were the CEO for the day, I would probably double click into that idea. It takes meaningfully fewer people than are probably there. It takes a lot less money than one has to spend to build the complicated hardware infrastructure. but it's deeply differentiating over the next 20 years.
You brought up earlier the podcast, and for those who don't know, Chamath is one of 4 regular people on the All In podcast.
Besties.
The besties, right. So let me actually ask, so the conceit of the show is that you are 4 friends, you have different opinions on different things, and you get together either virtually or in person, and you have a conversation. It's almost kind of like a group of people over a bar or dinner table. It's become, I will just say, weirdly popular.
Weirdly,
I mean,
weirdly popular.
Weirdly popular among people who don't necessarily care about what you do for a living. You've obviously gotten in some trouble for some things you've said on that show. I'm curious, given the popularity of it, do you now find yourself sometimes checking yourself, or do you feel greater responsibility for everything you utter on it? Because it isn't just 4 guys around a table at your house. It's going out in a lot